Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, Anita Finley.
Eleanor Lerman, you've heard her before. We've had some beautiful books from her. Actually, I have to just tell you, though, one thing, besides, of course, poetry that she's done, we have, what is the name of your poetry book again? I don't have it here.
The last one that was published was Strange Life.
Oh, yeah, Strange Life. I'm sorry. I love Strange Life. But what I really love, of course, and you know, since I'm a sci-fi person, is Radiomen. That was the last book we featured on Book of the Month. And how's that doing?
It's been doing really well. It's gotten some wonderful reviews. And it's gotten a lot of buzz, word-of-mouth buzz, I think. One of the interesting places I was able to promote it that it's gotten picked up a lot is in the sort of ham radio world.
That's right. All those people
Makes sense.
Right. Now, Art Bell, you know who that is, don't you?
Yeah, he's back on the radio.
I know. I saw that. Yeah, I guess he's not afraid anymore because, you know, he stopped that because of it. He was worried.
Well, you know, there were all kinds of strange stories about what was going on with him. He also had some really serious personal problems. So it's kind of a balance between figuring out what was going on, the personal problems or, you know, other stuff. Just the important thing is that he's found a venue to be back on the radio. It's interesting also what he chose, or perhaps what he's been forced to choose, which is internet radio. You know, you have to download an app and you have to listen to it on your phone. So he's ventured off into different territory.
Right, because he used to be on the radio. Now George Norrie, he's taken over that, right?
Yeah, Coast to Coast,
yeah.
Which is, I think, the biggest paranormal show.
Yeah.
I mean, it's on all night.
It is.
When those things should be on.
Right, and I think the best thing is some of the people who call in. I mean, I love to hear them. Some of these people, you don't know if they're really real or what, but it's, and I haven't listened to it for a while, but I really am. Somehow I love that genre. It's just, I don't know where I get that from. My husband keeps saying, where did you get this interest? And I said, I think it started with The Stranger in a Strange Land, Heinlein's. And ever since then,
yeah.
that was my favorite.
Well, you have to know how to grok things, right?
Right. So, and go ahead.
There's something about late night radio that is perfect for paranormal stuff. Because you're like laying in bed in the dark with this old-fashioned technology by your bed, you know, listening to the radio. And it's such a connection to childhood and to the mysteries of childhood. I think all of us as kids, either we were watching The Twilight Zone or some older cousin told us stories, or a lot of us read this book called Stranger Than Fiction, which had all these weird stories in it. So a lot of this is visceral to childhood, even though you don't remember it. Because when you're a kid, you know, the idea of there being something else, you want there to be something else. Your life is, you know, you're home, you're eating your dinner, you go to school, they let you watch a few cartoons, you go to bed. But the idea that, you know, somewhere out there in the darkness, there's something else, it's fantastic.
Right. Reminds me of a story. I have a very sweet cousin. She's about 6 years younger than I, and I would be staying at her house on occasion, and she idolized me because I was the older cousin, and I don't know how this started, but I said, you see the moon? Well, there's lots of things going on in that moon. You have no idea. She is still today, she's now in her 60s. She's still today looking at the moon and remembering when she was a little girl, she would crawl on the floor so that the moon couldn't see her. I didn't do that intentionally, but she really had a moon complex.
You know, a lot of my poems have featured the moon. The moon has been a big player. Because when I was a kid, I would lay in bed in the Bronx, and out the window I could see the elevated train tracks. It was sort of where the train made it curved around the bend and came to the end of the number 4 line. And I remember laying in bed, I could see the train tracks and the sky, and when it was up, the moon. And so the moon to me was always a companion, and it was tied into the idea of the train coming and going. So it was also about freedom, because the idea that one day I'd be old enough to get on the train and, in my case, go down to Greenwich Village and live a bohemian life. Eventually I did do that. But so that was, the moon can have quite a pull on you.
Well, my husband wrote a story about the moon, and it's a very interesting, and he's been looking for someone to edit it and work on it. And you know what? It's the first time it even came to my mind that maybe this is something for you. I don't know. We'll talk about this later, but he's been writing other things, but this is a very interesting book. It has very strange things in it. So we may just talk about this later, Eleanor. Maybe it's going to be from both of you. I don't know, but it's very weird. And I know you like weird.
I do like weird.
I know you do. Well, Radiomen, that was great because maybe you ought to tell a few people about this so I won't spoil it because it was one of these things about a family member who got you started on this.
Yeah, the story, it is a novel, it's fiction, but the idea came to me because, like your cousin who always had the moon in her mind. When I was little, I had an uncle who was a physicist of all things, the first person in a family of immigrants to have even gone to college. And one day when I was little, he took me out on the fire escape, and he had built a radio receiver, a special one, so that we could listen to one of the Sputniks. It wasn't the first one. There were actually lots of Sputnik satellites. But he wanted us to listen to the telemetry signal of one of the Sputniks. And all it was a little beep, 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 beep. But there was something about that. We were supposed to be scared of Sputnik when we were kids because it was the Russian satellite. But there was something about the fact that my uncle wanted to hear this, and I loved him, and I revered him, that to me it almost sounded like a friend, signaling me. Also, this particular Sputnik was one that had a dog in it. And many of the dogs they sent up there came to sad fates, but this particular one, whose name was Zevdochka, she had been named by Yuri Gagarin, the famous Russian cosmonaut. She survived this flight. So I took that real part of my life and turned it into a story about a woman with a strange dog who eventually has what she realizes is alien contact, and they're looking for something. They want something they think her uncle had. And what it is part of a radio network, eventually she understands. Why do the aliens want to set up what was a lost radio network? Because, like humans, they're confused and they don't understand who God is or what God is, but they wish they could know. And what they want to do is send prayers out into the universe. They're looking for God. And the way they do it is they're setting up radio networks all over the universe. And she has to help them get back this piece of the radio network that they need. She and her dog, who turns out to have a connection to the distant past and perhaps when aliens were here before. So it's really an homage to what we were talking about earlier, the fact that when you're a child, you can be so impressed by the idea that there's something more and fascinating out there in the night, and how that can influence your later life, even when you're living what seems like a perfectly normal to the rest of us ordinary life. Maybe in the back of your mind there's still the belief that there could be something else out there.
Now, something that you just cleared up for me and made me think about it. In order to do my Saturday morning show, I get up at 4 and I'm usually out the door by 4:30 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been doing this for 25 years. So I remember, I don't know if it was 10, 15 years ago, that I'd look up at the sky because I always like it, very early like that. It's still very dark. And I would see that look like an extra planet, or it looked like something, like something coming down to us. And I'd look at it and I'd say, I never saw that before. There is definitely something and someone in some outer space vehicle. And I noticed that this started to have one, and then before you knew it was a second one. And I think I mentioned it to my husband. I said, very strange, early in the morning like that, there are things out there. And now what you're telling me, those were what? The Sputniks? And
Not 15 years ago, but what you're probably seeing early in the morning or late night are satellites. And as a matter of fact, online, maybe on NASA's website, but there are amateur websites also, you can actually find maps and schedules of where you can look for satellites in the night sky or the dawn sky. And you can actually see more of them than you think. Some of them are in close enough Earth orbit, but you can see them sort of beeping and blinking their way across the sky. As a matter of fact, last summer, I forget what it was, but one of them was an American satellite was coming particularly. Its orbit was decaying a little, and I remember it was on the news. They said you could see it, and I live by the beach, and everybody had gone out on the beach, and there was an amateur astronomy club there too, and that's what we were watching, this little satellite poking its way across the sky.
So then I was seeing something that was different for me for so many years, and I hadn't put that together. I said, I'm really seeing something out there, and maybe it's because they feel at this time of the morning they can come out, whoever they are up there. You can see.
A lot of it, believe it or not, has to do with the atmosphere, the ionosphere, the different weather conditions, and the atmospheric conditions at different times of the year, and the orbital paths and how close these things, what kind of orbit they're in, and whether sometimes when the orbit is decaying, there's so much junk floating around the Earth. If you ever look at a projection of the Earth and the millions of pieces of stuff floating around it, including from a couple of famous crashes of satellites into each other, the Earth is just surrounded by full satellites and debris, man-made debris. And a lot of it you can, at night or in the morning, you can see it. So, before you think you're being visited by our friends from beyond, although that would be interesting in and of itself, you may just be seeing stuff we've caused to be up there, which makes it no less fascinating and exciting.
Oh, definitely. I've often thought that I would like to be able to see someone from outer space. I don't think I'd be afraid. I don't think you would. Would you?
Well, I guess it depends.
Right.
People have been warning us for a long time, including Stephen Hawking, surprisingly. Be careful what you wish for, because whoever we come across may not be friendly and may actually have evil intentions towards us. But, it's impossible to understand that. I think I may have said to you before that, to me, the most telling thing anyone ever said about this was Whitley Strieber. Has written all the books, Communion, and lots of books about his alleged alien encounters. And he said, people are always asking him, well, what do they want? And his answer was, how could we possibly know? You're asking me a question that would lend itself to some sort of logical answer. They want this, they want that, they're abducting people because of X, Y, Z. He said, how could we possibly understand their motivations? We aren't them. We haven't, we don't exist in whatever reality they exist in. We can't assume that we know everything about existence, so that would allow us to understand what their motivations are. And I think that's, if there are others, and I assume there are somewhere, I think that's probably true. We'd have to start from the point of us understanding that we probably don't understand anything. And I hope that we could find a way to make some sort of contact.
Right. It's Stephen Hawking. That's interesting. Well, I would believe anything he would say.
Well, it's very controversial, and it's something that he's just in past years begun to espouse. And I don't think anyone's quite sure why he's taken that view. I mean, he's not backing it up with any evidence. It's just his opinion. I don't know why he's gone to quite such a dark place with this, but that's what he says.
Yeah, I just read something recently that he said he thinks he's ready now to go. Had you seen that, where he was being interviewed? Yeah.
He's got to be in his 70s now? I don't know how old he is.
Well, it's just been such a struggle, but he's such an amazing person. I certainly hope that he has donated his brain to science.
Well, wherever he's going to go for his next act, I'm sure they're ready and waiting for him.
Right. Well, I just want everyone to know I got so interested. When I talk to Eleanor Lerman, I forget even why I'm talking to her. I know why, but I know I want to help promote her book. It's called Radiomen.
Thanks.
And Radiomen is a very, very interesting book. It's very down to earth, and yet it does have a lot of the sci-fi in it. But you'll love it. It's got mystery in it and people that aren't so nice. But she lives in New York, and she keeps. I remember her first novel was Janet Planet. And then, of course, as she said, Strange Life. And I've just been a real fan of her work. And this is something that she does. She doesn't do this casually. A lot of people write books. They're doing other things and they write a book. But this is what she is. She is a writer. And she spends her every day and every night, whenever whatever she's doing, this is her profession. And when did you, I don't know if I asked you this before, maybe people wouldn't remember as I haven't. When did you start this career?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting you asked me that. When my mother died when I was 14, but before she died, I think when I was about 12 or 13, she gave me a typewriter for my birthday, and I still have it. It's a gray, I think it's an Underwood. It's a manual typewriter, a little typewriter in a brown box. So she must have known that this is that somehow this was where I was going. I do remember in grade school, we were told to write a story, the way they tell kids, write a story about something. And I remember I wrote a novel, or what I thought was a novel. It was about a horse, because what do little girls write about? Horses. And it happened that even though we lived in the Bronx, very, very urban neighborhood, it was near a park, and in the park there was a stable where there were horses. You could, pay a little bit of money and ride a horse. So I was familiar with horses, so I wrote a novel about a horse. His name was Distant Call. I still remember this. I struggled over thinking what I would name the horse. So somehow it was always there. And what helped me along, and I forgive me if I've told this story before.
No, you haven't.
When I was, in high school, like all kids in that era, I was exposed to poetry. People, teachers, they gave us poetry to read. This is back in the 1950s, early 1960s. But the poetry they gave us was stuff I remember very well. Was like Robert Browning, My Last Duchess. Okay, very nice. I figured out what it was about, but who would write stuff like this? It had nothing to do with me. Or even Robert Frost, which was understandable. You understand the thing about the snowy woods and taking the path less traveled. But, what did it have to do with me? This was about an old man in Connecticut, in the woods or something. I was a young woman living in an urban setting. Later, we ended up living in Far Rockaway, which was a dying beach town. So I was being given all this poetry to read that I thought only old white men would write this stuff. Little Jewish girls in dying beach towns didn't write things like this. One day I went into the town in Far Rockaway, took a bus, and I had to go to the drugstore. And if you remember, in drugstores, they used to have revolving racks, and there were books in them.
Right.
And I picked up a book by someone I had heard on the radio, Leonard Cohen. I had heard him singing, right? Because his big song at the time was Suzanne Takes Me Down to Her Place by the River.
Right.
I had no idea that he was a poet, but I picked up this little book called A Spice Box of Earth. I bought it.
Wait, what was it called?
A Spice Box of Earth, or The Spice Box of Earth.
Huh.
I still have it. It's a little slim volume. I'm looking at my bookshelf. It's probably up there somewhere. And I remember getting on the bus, and it was back to my house, which was an unhappy household. And it was like a half-hour ride from the town to my house. That, and I started reading the book. My life changed on that bus ride because I'd gotten halfway through the book of poems, and something a light went on in my head, the proverbial light bulb, and I said, I get it. I can do this. Because he was writing, he's probably 10, 15, 20 years older than me. But he didn't sound like it. He sounded like a contemporary. He sounded like a guy. And he wasn't writing poetry with your little pinky stuck out. He was writing something very visceral and passionate, and it was very modern. And it was like, I remember talking about walking down a street in Montreal. I didn't know from Montreal, but I understood walking down a street feeling bereft and angry and lost in love. And that's what he was writing about, and I got it. And by the time I got home, I understood what I wanted to do and that I could do it. It took me a long time to actually be what I would consider any good at it, and much longer to be successful. But I got it. It really was that finger pointing at you, and saying, this is what you are. And I understood that so deeply on that bus ride.
It's a fantastic story, and I'm sure you've heard him in concert.
I have, and I will tell you, I got to meet him once. For a year, a long, long time ago, I was a comedy writer. When cable television first was in New York, I worked for Richard Belzer, who everyone knows from Law and Order, but he was a stand-up comic at the time, and he was just starting his career, and I was doing some writing for him. And he had one of the first cable variety shows, very local, called Hot Properties. And we used the show because nobody watched it, we assumed. People would say, Richard, I like this singer, I like this writer, let's have him on the show. So whoever you wanted, we'd put him on the show. So I begged him to get Leonard Cohen, who was big, but not quite as big then. So he happened to be in New York. We got him on the show. And I remember him walking up to the room, and he was this dark-eyed, gorgeous man, beautiful man, and walking up to him and saying, oh, Mr. Cohen, I loved your work, and I'm trying to tell him the story of the bus and the book, and changed my life, and blah, blah, blah. And he sort of, I realize now, he was on tour. He was probably exhausted. He doesn't know where he is. Somebody said, go do this stupid television show. I remember him sort of patting me on the head and going, yeah, that's nice of you. I'd really like to go to a movie after this. What's playing around here? Where do you think I should go?
You should have gone with him.
I should have. But I'll tell you, in all the years after that, everyone said, well, that's dismissive. I said, no, it was perfect.
Of course.
Because he wasn't playing rock star. He was what I thought. He was a guy.
Right.
He was tired. He was going to do this stupid television show that 3 people watched, and he wanted to be left alone and go to a movie. And I thought that was perfect. He was treating me like a person.
That's true.
Not like a little fangirl going,
right. Right. Right.
Hey, you're in New York. I'm in New York. What's a good movie to go see?
Right. And did you know? Did you know?
I hope who remembers? I hope I recommended something good. Knowing me, I probably recommended this movie called El Topo. And anyone who's listening to this now who used to live in New York in the 60s knows El Topo, this horrible cult movie that every hippie went to. You got really stoned and watched them blow up rabbits for some reason.
No!
Yeah, God knows what this movie was about. It involved cowboys and saints and lots of rabbits getting blown up. And everybody, it was the first midnight cult movie. So that's probably where I sent poor Leonard Cohen.
But that's quite a story, as a matter of fact. I didn't know you were a comedy writer.
Yeah, I was for a couple of years. I'll tell you the worst joke I ever wrote. I had a partner, and writing partner, and we used to work in the Saturday Night Live offices, not the show, but the offices where the secretaries were. But at night, when everyone was gone, we'd be in there writing jokes because Richard was working for NBC on the radio at that time. He had an early morning show, which is why we were writing late at night. And we were so bored and trying to write jokes for early morning drive time. We'd be pushing ourselves, each of us pushing the other one around in a mail cart to keep us awake, writing stupid jokes. But it didn't matter. They just had to say puns between reporting, what the traffic problems were. So the worst joke we ever wrote was, what is the cereal America fears the most? Dreaded wheat. I know, it's horrible, but, at 3 a.m, that sounds like a good joke.
Right.
So, yeah, that's what we did. We wrote jokes for morning drive time.
You are very talented. You've put your time in, haven't you? You certainly have. Do you love this as much as you did when you first started?
More. Because I understand better how to do it. And as much as when you're young, your work is driven by desire and passion and all these incredible emotions, which is very important. But the older you get, you learn to, it's like building a vessel around that. You learn to contain that with discipline. And you learn how to make a craft out of all these raging feelings so that you're not just spilling stuff on a page, but you're actually in some control over what you're doing, which, interestingly enough, lets you be freer, especially in fiction, because in fiction you're often following where your characters lead you. You have to have enough trust in your skill that you can follow where the characters are going, but you can bring them back if they're going somewhere that doesn't really serve the story. So I'm more comfortable now. I'm less, I'm less frightened of whether or not I'll be any good at it, and I'm more concerned with being good at it.
Do you travel a lot to get new ideas? Where do you get your ideas? You just sit there and all of a sudden you read things, or generally?
Yeah, I don't go anywhere. I hate to travel. I don't go. I live across the street from the beach. That's as far as I'm going, to the water's edge. I read a lot. Yeah, I read a lot. And I am not ashamed to say I'm addicted to television because television tells me stories. And whatever story that I'm watching or being told can take me in my own mind to another story. So for me, it's stories. It's books and TV and movies.
Well, I was thinking about what's going on in politics today. I mean, I was here, when you said about the comedy. Anyway, I think we've just run out of time. So we're going to cover that next time. But Eleanor, thank you. I love having you on our radio show. You're just a jewel, and I am going to get back in touch with you about what my husband's writing. This may be something. When you talked about that, who knows? It has to do with the moon. Has to do with the moon.
I love it.
I think you will. I think you will.
Okay.
Thank you so much,
care.
Eleanor. Yes, it was great. Bye.